Okay, so now let's bring up the uranium panel, and I'm going to get a lot of hate. David Cates from Denison, Dev from Fission, Amir from UEC, and is it, who's from EFR? Oh, Jeff, my buddy Jeff Klenda from UR. Jeff and I drove in a pickup truck to Lost Creek. Jump, what, you can't jump? David, are you vertically challenged? All right. So Dev, let's start with you. Your largest investor, CGN, has put in over $100 million, correct?
They put in $82 million at 85 cents a share.
Okay.
For the best editorial on junior mining, visit cambridgehouse.com/mining. Click the link in the description below to learn more.
So now with back then they were a different name, they've now renamed as China General Nuclear, is that correct?
Yeah, CGN, they've been renamed a couple times in different, but definitely CGN now.
So CGN's a lot easier for you to say. But here's the thing, a lot of people aren't aware that CGN has been put on the list with the Americans for not sanctions, but almost sanctions because of the technology transfer. So with this trade war, how does that work for you as a partner? Do you see any changes there?
Well, we don't. First of all, I think America only represents, 22% of the world market. So for us as a Canadian company,
26.
The 104 reactors, so for us, it's even if the price, all this stuff happens, only represents only a quarter of the world. Even the price is set here, and the trade war only impacts that. There's still 75% of the market that's free trading, and the price will change. I'm not a political expert, but I do think eventually it's no one's interest for each group to throw mud at each other's, and I think Trump will find an answer for it. But CGN, their views aren't this quarter. Corporations in North America think about this quarter. When they invested with us, 3-4 years ago, they did it with a belief of 2023. So they just have a very different perspective on
the Chinese time frame, not the North American.
North American.
So Jeff, we go back a long time. We visited your site when you first put it on with Wayne. What's your take about my thesis that Section 232? Look, I hope it happens because it's bull market on for everyone, but what I think is going to actually happen is it doesn't quite happen the way the market thinks. I think a quota system comes in, and the permitted unobligated companies, unobligated uranium is going to be where the funds flow in, so a very select few are going to have extraordinary gains versus everyone else.
Well, I couldn't agree more, and let me start by saying that I actually bought the Cold War, read it twice, and if you want to blame anybody for Section 232, blame Marin. We started this actually as a result of that, and frankly, we sat down, Amir and I met with Rick Perry in July of 2017, and frankly, the plans for 232 were laid before I hit the curb that day. And as to your thesis, I'm going to say you're wrong.
For the best editorial on junior mining, visit cambridgehouse.com/mining. Click the link in the description below to learn more.
And the reason that, not that you're assuming, first of all, tariffs were not the request. Under Section 232, we requested a quota system. We're in a position right now where we are importing over 98% of our consumption in the United States. That is dangerous foreign policy. What we're simply saying is, look, import 75%. We're fine with that, but reserve 25% for domestic consumption and from domestic producers. We think that that's a reasonable ask, and that anything used by the military be generated within the United States, also a reasonable ask.
So it's about 6 to 7 million pounds a year from the...
Actually, the 25% would actually represent somewhere around 12.5%.
But the military side?
Military side's unknown, so it's really hard to put a number on that, and they simply don't publish it. Like most other big nuclear powers, that's a national secret, and so you're not going to get that.
See, one thing that I've had a hard time is I've come up with my own calculations is what's left in the DOE.
Hard to say. Actually, Ron Hochstein did some good numbers on this a number of years ago, where he actually estimated that at that time, now this was probably 10 years ago, where he estimated that the reserves in the United States were somewhere around 120 million, government owned, but that more than 85% of those were in some need of reprocessing. So think about this now, 10 years later, fast forward, and a lot of that has been consumed, and it still is in need of reprocessing, but we lack the enrichment capability.
So here's the elephant in the room, though. Amir or Jeff, you can take this. What about the thousands of nuclear reactors that were pre-1960 that, yes, we don't have the enrichment capacity today, but if the American military invests, say, in a smaller enrichment, in my thesis that the modular style, they can, rather than sending the nukes to Russia to get downblended, they can do it in-house in a smaller scale to satisfy the domestic Department of Defense, the military's needs.
They absolutely can, and they will. Look, we've been meeting on a regular basis with the Department of Defense as a result of the Section 232 filing. And by the way, there's no time to go into it right now, but I would suggest to you, each and every one of you are here because you're uranium investors, and if you think that 232 is simply a U.S. thing, it's not. It will impact each and every player in the uranium space in one way or another, either directly or indirectly. But yes, our DoD is really focused on the small modular reactors. They intend to be able to put them on military bases and also things like mining projects around the world. One of the things that really stimulated that action was the floating reactor that the Russians put up in the Arctic. And now they own the Arctic as a result of it. It's interesting, but this is something that's going to happen, and I think that the Department of Defense is all over this. Section 232 is very real. It is a national security issue, and it's not lost on the Department of Defense.
So, Dev, the reason I brought you that question about CGN is Bill Gates is a huge proponent, as is Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger, on nuclear energy. But Bill Gates's private investment into these smaller modular reactors, it basically got sidelined because they had a partnership with the Chinese.
Yes.
And so that's what I was getting at with your thesis.
Well, yeah, absolutely. We've been to, when we signed the deal with CGN, and we went up to their, well, let's say what they showed us, not what they really have. They're actually ahead of anybody in the world of building small modular.
Because they bought the pebble bed reactor technology off the Germans.
Yeah, they're unbelievable. They're talking about 3 years ago how they'll build them for an offshore oil rig just to run that, not to use generators. But for me, I don't think it's a big deal. I don't think it's a security issue. I would be a contrarian and say it represents, what, 12 million pounds out of 190? So secondly, I don't believe in corporate welfare. I don't think it's a security issue. Most of the stuff is used for energy. Is used for lighting up bulbs. So when I saw that come out, I get it. It's going to help the U.S. companies. But to me, I don't believe in corporate welfare. It has nothing to do with security. It's simply a corporate handout.
What about quantitative easing? Amir?
I want to get Jeff going.
Okay, maybe I'll jump in the middle of that because being a Canadian, so I kind of understand why Dev is feeling the way he does. But having spent 14 years now building a U.S. uranium company and being drawn into it myself 14 years ago, because 14 years ago I thought it was crazy that the U.S. was importing 90% of its uranium requirements, and today it's 98%. You look at the chairman of our company, Spencer Abraham, who's a former U.S. Energy Secretary, he'll agree with the premise of Marin's book and what we're all talking about here, which is the U.S. felt 10 years ago that it was unacceptable that they were importing 60% of its oil requirements. So you put that in context with uranium, and it really is a very sort of profound situation. But move past whether it's about national security or not. I think I'll just take this down another direction and get you thinking about it. How many different prices of oil do we have right now? Marin, let's talk about that. There's a Canadian price.
25 at least.
Okay, you got, and so you think about pricing mechanisms here, and I think what we need to get comfortable with is that in the coming year, you're going to see the emergence of a U.S. uranium price. And that goes back to what Marin's talking about U.S. unobligated uranium. So the reality is that as new pricing mechanisms get established, that is completely common in the commodity market, very common in the oil market, where you've got WTI, you got Brent crude, and then you got the Canadian price. And the problem we have in Canada, the problem they have in Kazakhstan, is that they produce a lot of one thing. It could be uranium, it could be anything, where there's not a whole lot of domestic consumption. That's a big issue. So you look at our company, UEC, the uranium that we can mine in the state of Texas, we can sell in the state of Texas to plants in that state. The problem we have generally as Canada is that we export a ton of stuff, be it uranium, be it other natural resources, and we're in an environment where all the trade wars and everything going on, it becomes harder to just be an export nation. I'm saying that as a Canadian. I mean, I'd love to see that change to some extent. So ultimately, the key question to ask yourself, I think, today is, what will the U.S. uranium price be a year from now? Because there will be a U.S. uranium price. We're already seeing utilities come out and in requests for proposals say, we want U.S. origin uranium.
So we've written about that about 3 years ago after I gave my talk, and I just find it so ironic as a Canadian that the Americans, with all their grand socialist agenda, with the Democrats, yet 1 in every 10 homes in America is still powered by their Colder War enemy, which is kind of crazy if you think about it, right? So David, as the Canadian that sold their assets in the US, so I want to kind of, you know me, I'm going to put you on the fire. So with this bull market happening in the US, why did you sell your US assets, number one? And number two, I want to know about your thesis about doing ISR in the Athabasca Basin, which has never been done before. But with the Sabre technology, I think has serious legs.
Yeah, no, Marin, we definitely pivoted following Fukushima, moving the company from a U.S. production focus. We had assets in Mongolia and Africa as well, and we really decided to focus in Canada. The main reason being is that the highest quality assets are in the Athabasca Basin.
So the rumor that Lucas was just tired of making long flights isn't true?
No, I don't think that had anything to do with it, but the reality was that the assets that we had in the U.S. and the White Mesa Mill surrounding that were relatively high cost. And I think that's what we're clearly seeing in the way that the markets had to contract in the U.S. through difficult uranium prices, is that those assets really couldn't compete as the price softened through the tail end of this cycle. I mean, I'd love to get into the 232 debate a little bit more, because we don't really see anything that affects the natural market around pricing of uranium being a good thing for nuclear energy. I mean, the flip side to everything.
Yeah, but David, there is no natural market. Sorry to interrupt. I mean, what's so natural about 60% of global production being state-owned and state-backed? I don't think you can call that natural market.
And it truly is subsidized, right?
Yeah, no, look, what I'm saying here is that anything that increases the cost to a nuclear utility is bad for our industry.
But let's talk about the economics. Let's talk about the economics of that. So a triple in the spot price of uranium does what to the end user on the price of that electricity, David?
I'll tell you what, it goes up. The price goes up.
Negligible.
The price goes up, and we are already seeing nuclear reactors under pressure in the United States, right? How many times do we see different jurisdictions where there's other subsidy and other things in play that are making it difficult for nuclear reactors to compete?
But the price of uranium is not why they're under pressure.
Well, it's not going to help them if the price goes up 3 times, right? Well, so, I mean, that's just a principled side of things for us. We don't see anything that artificially interferes with the price that a utility can pay on uranium being a positive thing for nuclear energy broadly. But then going over to sort of why we're in the Athabasca and our focus now on ISR is I think we've seen that ISR is the world's lowest cost method for uranium mining. It's been very successful in Kazakhstan and Australia. You see it in Russia as well as in the United States. And of course, Jeff has done very well with ISR operations to be able to sustain production as long as he did in this market, right?
Even though he didn't listen to me about not producing during that day.
I've been buying. I've been buying in the market, though, remember. $21 a pound selling into $50 contracts. Yeah. Mine's standing in the ground.
And so what we're trying to do basically in the Athabasca is take advantage of the geology. We have a very high-grade deposit that's nested in sandstone.
What's the highest? You want to walk through?
No, it is the highest grade undeveloped deposit for uranium. It's our Phoenix deposit on our Wheeler River property. And that sandstone had always been...
on the eastern side of the basin?
Yeah, it's just between the MacArthur River Mine and Key Lake Mill. And, that sandstone had always been a big liability in the basin because it's filled with water, the ground is permeable, it's fractured, it's difficult for an underground mining operation. But really, it's everything you'd want from an ISR mining operation because you need to move that mining solution.
So are you going to be using Sabre technology for that?
No, it's really a conventional ISR type operation, but using freezing technology to encapsulate our deposit.
So it's still early days, but at what price can you make uranium?
Well, we're estimating an operating cost of $3.33 US and an all-in with initial CapEx, sustaining CapEx, and OpEx under $9 US. So we say that we could do really well today at 29
So Jeff,
bucks.
as someone who's lived it, and Amir, someone who's lived it, do you call bullshit on that?
Look, let me clear up a couple of misconceptions here. First of all, 232 is not some 1930s Smoot-Hawley style protectionism. It absolutely is not. It was designed under the Trade Expansion Act of 1962 to address dislocations that had an impact on national security. Now, you can say it was misapplied in steel and aluminum and automobiles and whatever else, but the reality is that becoming 98% dependent, more than 40% of that now coming from Vladimir Putin and his confederates. Now, I would suggest that you talk to the people in Western Europe and Eastern Europe that have been reliant on Mr. Putin for natural gas and oil and see how frequently he has used this as a political weapon geopolitically whenever it has suited his purposes. And you want to talk about corporate welfare. I'll tell you what corporate welfare is. Corporate welfare is Kazakhstan, state-owned entity, heavily government subsidized. Their currency devalues by more than 90%. They have virtually no environmental standards, and they benefit from virtual slave labor. Now that's corporate welfare. And we have been the subject of their dumping for many, many years. Look, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, these guys were producing 500,000 pounds a year. Last year it was 63 million
Jeff,
pounds.
I would add that all roads lead back to Moscow.
Of course
Jeff,
they do.
Jeff,
and your
why
book
not,
laid that out very, very well. And so the fact is that the econometric studies that we did that were submitted as part of our petition clearly indicated that the impact to those your electricity users in the United States that were using nuclear was going to be about $1.20 per month. And so when you think about that, the average payer for an electricity bill with nuclear provider is about $110 a month. The average increase in cost, according to our econometric study, was $1.20 a month.
So
that is
a
not
cup
a
of
massive
coffee.
increase.
Yeah, Jeff,
No,
why not?
David?
Why not go after Kazakhstan and Russia and just put tariffs on those? I mean, you talk about steel and aluminum being ridiculous. I mean,
I'm saying it was misapplied.
Right. That's, well, I can call it ridiculous. That's fine. But I mean, what's unfriendly about Canadian uranium, Australian uranium, uranium from friendly countries
There's
in
nothing
Africa?
unfriendly about it, and I think that what you're probably going to see here is that this is something that's probably a common misperception. Cameco is an important company. It's important to this country. It's important to our country. And the fact is that I would fully expect that Cameco and probably Canada are going to receive an exemption under this. And that is something that is absolutely critical
But
to us as a
Australia has
country.
actually hedged a lot of their production to China.
There's very
That's the
little
other
production
fact.
coming in. Most of it's going to China and India now. You're absolutely right.
At different prices, right? So this whole concept.
Okay,
that laid out.
but sorry, just one thing to add there is because again, there's I think a lot of confusion on this, even maybe on this panel here. In the case or in the outcome that we're talking about quotas, Canada, nor the Kazakhs, nor anyone needs an exemption because the quota is reserving a percentage of the domestic demand for US production, meaning Canada and the Kazakhs and the Russians are totally free to sell into the other 75% that's wide open. So this is what would be different than a tariff system where some kind of exemptions would be needed. In the event that it's tariffs, and we've all seen President Trump tweet and say, I'm a tariff man, whatever the case might be, right? Then you got to consider, all right, well then will Canada get an exemption and how would that work? But again, if we're talking about quotas, not only will quotas lead the way to the development of a US uranium price, they will also keep things wide open for broad competition from Canadian pounds to Kazakh pounds, et cetera, to be part of the pounds needed that are outside of the quota system. There really doesn't need to be a debate about that.
So let's now, Dev, I'm going to kind of put you under the fire here, and I've said this to your team years ago. I've always believed that you and NextGen should be merged. And I was actually, when Denison and Fission almost merged, I said it shouldn't happen. I didn't see the synergies, but there's definite synergies on the western side of the basin. So A, why haven't you guys merged? And B, is that eventually what you see happening?
You know, if I knew that and why the pass interference call wasn't made yesterday, I would have made a lot of money. Okay, I'm still angry about it. I'm hurt. Well, first of all, I mean, I think that...
Because can the projects work independently with 2 mills?
Absolutely. You know, just a couple of things.
At what price?
Oh, I think our PAs
You need
are all
north of
showing up.
55, $60?
Oh, much less than that, but depends on what you want a rate of return. But the PAs are showing under $20 and a rate of return back in 1.4 years because of high grade. Just one last thing. When I got into business, I'm the longest serving CEO of a uranium company, 22 years.
Is that something to be proud of?
Or stupid, one of the two. I'm stubborn or I'm what, I don't know. But, when I got into business, we used to talk about the U.S. used to produce 40 million pounds and needed 4. Got it? So they produced 10 times what they needed. Now they need, 50 million pounds and only produce a little. And yeah, there's lots of change. Oil companies left the business. There's been a structural change. And yes, we've got Kazakhstan in need of cash.
And in 20 years went from 0 to 60 million pounds in 20 years.
Absolutely. They need the cash. It's a socialist country where they have to feed and they got to keep these jobs going. Now my hope is that when they've gone public now, that there will be some sort of accountability. To me, hopefully they will not keep dumping. And that's one of the reasons the yellowcake deal was done, is they realize for them to be successful as a public company, they have to get this uranium off the market. And that's why they did the I met with Kazatomprom in Zurich, and to do some things with them possibly. And what I've learned is they are motivated, like everybody on here, to get the uranium price up.
So uranium, Amir, you were one of the few guys that navigated that for your investors in that yellowcake deal. So shortly, in 1 minute or less, can you explain that yellowcake deal and how investors in Uranium Royalty Corp are benefiting?
Yeah. It's just about a year ago, we became aware of the fact that Kazakhs and Kazatomprom wanted to put about 8 million pounds of uranium into an investment vehicle listed in London. We looked at the fact that the uranium price at the time was $21 per pound, well below even some of the lowest cost mines you can imagine out there. For Uranium Royalty Corp, the concept has been to look for not only investment opportunities in royalties and streams, but physical as well, where you can also have access to a supply agreement. I talked yesterday about how there's such a wide open space and opportunity set to do royalty deals in uranium. Can you imagine if you could walk in as a gold royalty company and sign a 10-year supply agreement with Newmont? It would be rare. It'd be
at a
impossible.
Price of gold lower than anyone makes money at.
So for Uranium Royalty, it was a fascinating opportunity.
$22.
We were able to secure and provided a lead order investment of up to $25 million to Yellowcake to go buy uranium from the Kazakhs, or the lead investment from Uranium Royalty Corp of $25 million allowed them to go and attract another $175 million. So when it was all said and done, they raised $200 million at $21 per pound. And for us, obviously, that investment has gone up in value quite a bit because uranium prices are now at $29 per pound. And it's done very well, and it's been good for Uranium Royalty to do that, but also now to have a 10-year supply agreement with one of the world's largest producers and be able to buy uranium and tuck it away. Yellowcake is a company that we're excited to be a shareholder of. We're the largest shareholder of that, we being Uranium Royalty, and UEC is the largest shareholder of Uranium Royalty Corp. But what we really learned from that is the fact that there is some supply discipline kicking in over at Kazatomprom, because you're talking about a company that for its entire life has been a government-owned entity, and now, and focused really on the top line, total volume, and now they're really focusing on value and the bottom line, margins and profitability, and driving some kind of shareholder return. That's a pretty actually important turning point for any uranium investor. Now, as an investor in the uranium sector, you're more aligned with the world's biggest producer, where up until literally end of last year when the IPO completed, they had a totally different objective. You and I care about the bottom line, they cared about the top line. Now we all care about the bottom line. And that also is a very interesting and positive turnaround for the whole industry.
So in my book, I talked about the potential black swan of Nazarbayev has been in power for, 46 years? And his daughter has no interest in running the country. She's positioned herself in London. What happens to the power vacuum of Kazakhstan when he eventually does pass? Will the Russians move in? Will the Chinese move in? Generally speaking, if you look at any of the major oil producers or copper producers in a situation like that in the past, there's a power grab, and when power grabs happen, there's a struggle. And could production be could that be a potential catalyst? Does anyone have any comments there? Because he's, I think, 84, 86 years old now.
I don't necessarily have a direct comment on that. I would just really say that I think if your job is to sit at a nuclear power plant and be a purchasing manager of fuel, you look at diversification on a number of fronts. You look at country diversification, you look at supply from different mines, and you really want to have your uranium come from a number of different sources, a number of different mines, a number of different points on the cost curve. And so arguably, it probably is not the healthiest situation for any global fuel buyer to have so much concentration in one basket, just like it wouldn't be healthy for OPEC to become too large of a component for, let's say, the oil market. I think ultimately at the end of the day, it's remarkable how much Kazakhstan has increased this uranium production. In 1995, it was almost nothing, and today is 40% of global production.
Yep.
So ultimately, diversification isn't a bad thing, and I don't think they mind that either.
So in the last 6 months, I've had more LPs approach me about getting involved in creating limited partnerships or funds to go and benefit from this low price of uranium. I'm assuming the four of you have been approached by a number of these American, savvy investors. So I think it's early days when I talk about my 10x thesis. I also don't think you should be budgeting $80, $90, $100 uranium, where a lot of thesis, for example, my good friend Rick Rules about, get out of the money uranium. I just don't see it at $80, $90. Does anyone on this panel see $80 to $90 or $100 uranium in the next couple of years? Just say yes or no. Dave?
No.
Yes.
Can you repeat the question?
$80 to $100 oil, uranium in the next couple of years.
Do you mind specifying? Do you mean for U.S. uranium?
Either or,
what are you
domestic, anywhere, China, I don't care.
So let's can we just walk through
the question was yes or no? No, Amir, come on, we got short time.
For U.S. uranium, higher than that. For U.S. uranium.
Okay, higher.
No.
No, either do I. All right, guys, hopefully you enjoyed it. Jeff, it'd be nice if you bought enough books for everybody in the audience so I can make some money here in this tough market.
I used them all. I sent them to Congress.
Well, we know that's not going to work. They're not going to read it. All right, guys, thank you very much. Peter Spina's up for the silver panel. Thanks, guys.